Are American families having budgets squeezed by a multi-trillion-dollar coalition of bankers? The dollar has fallen in value, taking away spending power of the poor and middle classes. This has been happening at an ever-increasing rate since 1913. Items that cost $1 before the First World War now take $50 or more to purchase. As more currency is printed, their value declines in what some political observers claim is due to, in part, policies of not just the Federal Reserve, but the World Bank. This has caused some investors to put their money into digital currencies, including Bitcoin. And that commodity did take a hit after Mt. Gox, a trading firm, reports $500 million missing from its accounts. However, the digital currency has rebounded, being up over 17% in just the last few days. Karen Hudes studies law at Yale and economics at the University of Amsterdam. She worked in the legal department of the World Bank from 1986 to 2007. Today, Hudes is among a new generation of whistleblowers. She travels around the world informing the public about the secret deals happening inside the World Bank. Hudes is our guest on the show today. We're going to talk about monetary policy and how it affects spending power. We're going to talk about Bitcoin and other digital currencies, including the recent trouble at Mt. Gox. We'll also discuss how the crisis in the Ukraine ties into these other issues and what may happen next in Crimea. Welcome to the show, Karen.
Thanks for having me, Gary. Glad to be back.
All right, so let's talk about money. We got it in our back pocket. We got it in the bank. Some don't have it in the bank. There's digital currencies floating around. What is causing people's spending power to drop? I mentioned the Federal Reserve policies. A lot of people know about the Federal Reserve being a private banking institution. But what about the World Bank? How does that play into the average person's spending power?
The World Bank and its sister organization, the International Monetary Fund, are very special organizations. They are sitting on top of the world's wealth, which was put into a secret account, and it has more gold than anybody knows about. And it is cloaked in secrecy. The bankers do not own that money. It's held in benefit for humanity. And the bankers are refusing to release it. Instead, they're trading on it, stealing from every person on this planet. That's what they're doing, illegally.
So the money that's being held in the World Bank is held by, well, you say it's held by the people, but the bankers are trading on it. Please elaborate.
Okay, the World Bank and the IMF are listed on a special agreement that was signed in 1950 about that. Assets, it's gold. It's more gold than people know about. It's over 1 million metric tons of gold. And the World Bank and the IMF have a special role to play, making sure that that money is spent to the benefit of humanity.
So where's the gold? Some people believe that the gold in Fort Knox has disappeared. That's been in question for many years. Congressmen have attempted to get an audit of the gold in Fort Knox. So 1 million metric tons of gold is not something you can just hide. Where would you say that gold is being stored?
400,000 metric tons are in the Central Bank of the Philippines. There's over 200,000 metric tons in Union Bank of Switzerland. And some of that gold is buried securely in the Philippines as well. Some of it is held in various banks, but the bulk of it is in the Philippines.
So the World Bank holds the note on that gold?
No. It is in a special trust account that was set up by Ferdinand Marcos, and the authorized signatory is a German banker lawyer by the name of Wolfgang Struck, who also lives in the Philippines.
So what are they doing with the gold then? They're just sitting on it?
That's exactly right. And the reason that they're doing that is because they have funny money. They have paper money, and they're using that funny money to charge interest on every single country's currency. That's just a scam. There's no reason for that.
So if they're holding this money, they're charging interest, or they're holding the gold, they're charging interest on this gold. How does this affect the average person and their dollar, the Federal Reserve, spending power, that type of thing?
It has a profound impact. It's the best way to explain it is like an analogy. Supposing you were an heir, and the person who was supposed to handle the will was taking the money you had inherited. and was not giving it to you. And so you had to go hand to mouth, and you were really very rich.
So the gold, explain now this gold, how is it the people's gold? How did this gold come into existence, and why is it belong to the people?
That's a very good question. This is gold that started out in Solomon. And then the Spanish conquistadors took the gold from the Aztecs and the Incas. And then between the war, World War I and World War II, a German general named Yamashita went around and he told people that they would be better off giving their gold to him for safekeeping. And he then issued promissory notes, which carry interest. Those notes are denominated in gold. There are about $210 trillion worth of them, plus the compounded interest. It's now in the quadrillion of dollars that is owed by these banksters that say we owe them money. No, they're the ones that are the ones in debt.
So how do the people get the gold back? If it's their gold and it was taken by these bankers, how do we receive it?
That is the question. And they're just sitting there illegally and refusing to relinquish it. Part of the problem is that this gold is cloaked in secrecy. But in the last month, Wolfgang Struck has been publishing all of the documentation. So it's there for people to see. We have the originals. And people just have to make sure that the banks do what they're required to do, which is release the world's wealth.
Are the bankers afraid of digital currencies?
That is a good question. I believe they are, but there's a lot of mystery surrounding the cryptocurrencies. For example, the chief executive officer of Bitcoin was a young woman in the prime of health, was found dead, presumably by suicide. The value of those currencies fluctuates. So it's a payment system, but I don't think it's a very secure investment, especially just imagine if something should happen to the internet. You would have lost all of your investment.
So you mentioned the apparent suicide of one of the executives at a Bitcoin trading firm, which really, I think, does it tie into this recent rash of banker suicides? We recently spoke with Gerald Celente. He had some insight into it. There's a lot of people who think that maybe these bankers maybe know more. Maybe some of them have been murdered, especially the strange suicide of the one banker, 7 shots by a nail gun to his body and his head. Not a very common way that people choose to commit suicide. So there's certainly some mystery there. Do you think that there's a connection across the board with all these banker suicides?
Well, many of these bankers are at J.P. Morgan. Many of them are trading in currency. Many of them knew each other. These are all red flags. I don't have any specific knowledge other than anyone else who's trying to put these pieces of the puzzle together. But one of the things that I have heard, and this certainly ties in with everything I know, is that these bankers understood that there was corruption going on that was tied in with the Vatican.
Now, we know that there was a Vatican banker who was found dead some years ago, and there was certainly some controversy there. But with these bankers committing suicide or perhaps being murdered, do you think that they know something that perhaps the way the global economy is heading and they feel there's no hope, or they're being silenced because of the way the global economy is moving?
What I believe is going to happen with the global economy is that we're headed not to a difficult situation, but to a wonderful situation, which is that the world's wealth comes out of its cloak of secrecy. And the reason why I'm so optimistic is because of a very powerful, it's called a power transition tool. It is based on political science. It was developed in part at the Defense Department, and a political scientist named Jacek Kugler came to the World Bank with this power transition model in 2004. What this model does is it looks into three different things. Who are the players in an issue? Where do the players stand? How powerful are those players? And also, how important is that issue to them? So, for example, assume that the President of the United States would be involved. The President has many things vying for his attention. So you have to try to decide how high on the pile of issues would that be for the President. And you have to give numbers. And then the computer, using game theory modeling, will crunch the numbers. And when that model gets into a disagreement with the intelligence analysts, the model wins hands down. It has a 90 to 95% accuracy rate. And in 2004, I modeled rule of law at the World Bank, and that model told me that the President of the United States would not be able to just handpick the President of the World Bank, which was something called the Gentleman's Agreement that had been in existence for 66 years. And I warned the Treasury Department that we were going to lose the Gentleman's Agreement based on this model. And that's what actually happened in 2010. Jacek Kugler used this model to talk about the power transition between the West and the upcoming economies like China and India, the emerging countries. Mm-hmm. And what this model showed was that if the United States could maintain its alliance, mostly with Germany, and would also continue to be allies with Russia and with Japan, that the emerging economies would wait for another century before they would emerge. And what Jacek Kugler had warned was, he said that if, for example, what happened in the war with Iraq, if the United States would do something which would alienate Germany as a very strategic ally, that we would land in a currency war. And so based on that model, you can see how stupid it is for the United States to be alienating Russia, which is a strategic ally.
We're seeing that for sure. That's occurring now in the Ukraine and over the Crimea. But you mentioned that this program would provide the optimism that you see for the global economy. There's a lot of people that might disagree with that because they're looking at economic indicators that say, money's being printed too quickly. QE1, QE2, QE3, and even with the emergence of Bitcoin as a trading medium, a lot of people are putting hope into that. I mean, there is a significant growing number of young people, computer geeks, investors who think that this digital currency holds the promise. Even Ben Bernanke, as he was leaving the Federal Reserve, said that he thinks that these digital currencies do hold a level of promise. Do you agree with that statement?
No, I absolutely do not. I think it provides flexibility. Mm-hmm. But where we are right now is we are at a fork in the road. And that is, we can have honest, solid currency, like what President Kennedy was doing 10 days before he was assassinated. John Kennedy had signed something called the Green-Hilton Agreement.
Is this the same as the Executive Order 1110 that issued the U.S. notes? Is that what you're speaking of?
Yes, but it also had another proviso to it, and that is this gold that I'm talking about that belongs to all of humanity. John F. Kennedy had arranged that that gold was going to underpin the Treasury dollars that were going to be issued. And that's why Kennedy was murdered, because that was going to cut off this boondoggle, this scam that the Federal Reserve has, which is unconstitutional. I was just talking with Professor Antal Fekete, who is the world's foremost monetary economist. And according to Professor Fekete, we are now facing a situation which is very similar to what we had just before we went into the Dark Ages. And that is, the paper currencies are going to crash. Paper currencies always crash. And the indicators for that are they're very frightening. So yes, there is reason to be pessimistic. That is if we do not do what is being offered to us. We are being offered this gold to underpin U.S. Treasury dollars, which have been printed by John F. Kennedy, and they're sitting uncut in a special trust account, which is held for the benefit of all humanity. We have been offered the opportunity to issue these dollars and underpin them with 170,500 metric tons of gold. And there is no reason not to accept this offer. There's only one reason why you wouldn't accept that offer. That is if you're a Federal Reserve banker and you want to continue to gouge the Americans with interest on the debt.
So who's behind these dollars and the push to bring them to the fore?
It should be all of the American citizens and all of our allies and all of humanity, which is served by a stable system underpinned by the rule of law. This is in everybody's interest.
Now, you mentioned the Ukraine and Russia and the conflict between East and West. How do you believe that this conflict is going to play out there?
Well, that's one of the reasons I'm so grateful to you for having me on the show. It really all depends on whether people understand that the media that is giving them disinformation is owned by the Federal Reserve and this system of control. There are 3 mathematicians at the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, Switzerland, that have modeled and looked at what the capital markets are, 43,000 transnational companies, and they found out that there is one system of control that is putting the same directors on the boards of all of these too big to fail banks. They're really one bank. That's why we have the LIBOR scandal. That's why we have gold price manipulations. And it's really up to humanity to realize that they're being hoodwinked, that when they turn on the news and they get the news from the mainstream media, they're just being fed propaganda.
What do you make of the recent resignations from the Russian television outlet Russia Today, their American branch? Just recently, one anchor resigned on the air. She said she wouldn't whitewash the state agency, the state news agencies' delivery or reporting of Vladimir Putin. What do you make of those types of resignations, even on the air, is such a dramatic thing to do?
I can speak to that because I was interviewed by that broadcaster. And I have been on RTTV 3 times, and I want to say that they were the only ones that were telling the Americans what I am now telling them, NWHD TV. But you will not see me on the other news. That was just propaganda. That's what that was. That RTTV is giving more news correctly than the mainstream media. And as a matter of fact, if you look at the public opinion polls, Americans are really no longer confident of the news they're getting from their media. Look at what happened in Syria, where they were being told that sarin gas was a reason for them to have a World War III in Syria. This is, I would say that it's highly questionable what happened there.
So you were on Abby Martin's program. I believe that's the broadcaster
right.
you're speaking of. So she's resigned, as so has the other broadcaster name. She escapes me now. So what do you make of their resignation, despite what you said, that the Russian television outlets providing a different point of view, a different perspective inside the American television markets, but for these 2 broadcasters to resign, what does it say of that news agency?
What I can tell you is that there is enormous pressure that is brought to bear for anyone who's trying to tell it like it is. I have been a whistleblower telling Americans what is really going on in their country. And it is very, very difficult to do that, but you have to know how important it is. And I would say that it's important for anyone who's listening to the news not to just take it like you're being fed pablum. You have to be discerning. You have to look behind what's going on. It seems to me that that those public resignations on the air are highly suspect.
So, how does the World Bank play into the Crimea situation with the Ukraine? I recently interviewed a gentleman who was in Ukraine, and he spoke to me about the loans that would be brought to Kiev. Kiev is seeking monetary support at this time. How does the money from the World Bank play into Kiev? Where are the strings? What are the strings, if there are any?
You have to look at what else was being offered to Kiev. The Russians were offering very favorable terms on debt to Kiev. So for Kiev to have walked away from that, and certainly when you have an elected official, for there to be thugs to come into the streets and chase an elected official, this is very, very concerning. And many people think that there were mercenaries involved. So I would say that what's going on in the Ukraine is probably a way to distract people from the real story, which is the story that you and I are talking about. If humanity doesn't get its act together on its currency and come up with clean currency, our paper currency is going to crash. We're going to go into something called permanent gold backwardation.
Well, I want to talk about that in a minute, but what I really want to understand, because you being at the World Bank, I really want to understand how the money provides the hook to that government. When that government says, yes, World Bank, we're going to take the money from you, what does Kiev owe the World Bank at that point?
A lot of people say that what the World Bank has been doing, this is also what Perkins has said, that they're creating a system of debt which holds these countries in a kind of slavery, repaying the terms of the borrowings that they have. And I believe that there's a lot of truth in that. So what you would have to look at is what role should these organizations, including the World Bank, play going forward, especially if there is now sound currency and you don't have to pay interest on the debt, the government debt that you're incurring when you issue your money. That's not a logical system. That's not a system that
So let me ask you then, why then is Kiev seeking monetary aid? What is the need for them to seek monetary aid? How come they can't source their own wealth from within that country?
I think that we do not have all the facts about what's going on in the Ukraine. I think what's going on in the Ukraine, as I said, is a way of distracting the world from what we really have to be concerned about. I think that we don't have all the facts on the Ukraine. I think it is just so much smoke and mirrors being trotted out in front of humanity. One of the things, though, that I have heard about in the Ukraine, which we really do need to start looking into, is that people discovered the oldest pyramid on Earth in the Crimea. We need to find out what that is. That is something that I think holds the key to our problems.
Yeah, certainly a fascinating archaeological discovery. I've looked into that myself. I'm fascinated when we find these new discoveries in the world, and certainly a pyramid of that size really changes the historical context of well, just history in general as we know it. But we can talk about that at another interview. You mentioned gold backwardation and the importance of gold. So what exactly is gold backwardation, and can you explain this for our viewers?
Yes. Just think about what life would be like if you went to the stores and there was nothing to buy in the stores. And all of the goods that you're used to getting, all of the goods just about have a foreign component in them these days. If we didn't have any way to pay for our trade, we would go into a tailspin, and that would just spiral down. All of the economies are very much interconnected, and we cannot run the risk that we cannot finance international trade. That is the risk that we're actually running. And the way you can quantify this is something called gold backwardation. And that is, if you try to buy gold today and you have to pay a premium for it, and the price of gold for immediate delivery is more expensive than the price of gold for future delivery. When that happens, that's called gold backwardation. And what that means is that people are starting to hoard gold, because gold is something very special. I know that people say you can't eat gold. Why would you consider it to be important? But the thing about gold is that it has been used through our entire history as currency. It has maintained its value. It doesn't go up or down. It is the measuring stick that other prices are used to measure against. So when gold goes into backwardation, and there's other things, other measures. For example, when you try to buy gold from COMEX, the amount of gold in COMEX has gone down precipitously. Another issue is that central banks used to lease gold. They're not doing that anymore. They stopped doing that in July. These are all danger signals. As Professor Antal Fekete said, we are on red alert.
What do you make of the recent banking moves that would restrict money, U.S. dollars, going overseas, especially Chase Bank, limiting international wire transfers for their clients or their customers? These are very troubling changes. People call them capital controls. Should the American people be concerned that the banks are starting to restrict the amount of money that people can withdraw?
Absolutely. And what they should also be looking at is they should be looking at the fact that China has downgraded the United States credit rating. They should be looking at the fact that Standard & Poor, when they downgraded the United States credit rating, that was when Eric Holder sued them. This is a very troubling sign. And now there's a fourth credit rating agency, the Universal Credit Rating Group. That's owned by China and Russia and some private investors. And they're about to take a very hard look at the credit rating for the United States. And it's not going to be a brilliant rating, I can tell you, because I have been informing these agencies about the dishonesty and corruption that I witnessed when I was inside the World Bank, and the fact that they were fiddling with the books at the World Bank. And when I went to the auditors, KPMG, and tried to inform the audit team that was looking at the World Bank's books, their assistant general counsel prevented me from telling them this. When the Government Accountability Office, that's the government auditor, tried to look at the World Bank books, which is under a study that was asked for by three senators, Senators Lugar, Leahy, and Bai. The World Bank stonewalled GAO and refused to collaborate. And then when the Congress appropriated money to the World Bank for a capital increase, which, by the way, has not been dispersed because the World Bank did not comply with the conditions. One of the conditions was that the effects of retaliation against whistleblowers should be eliminated. That wasn't done. And I bought a World Bank bond, and I sued the World Bank, and I sued KPMG for its false auditing. And this lawsuit was settled by 188 ministers of finance. I was reinstated, and I was given a pass to go into the meetings in the spring of 2013. And then the U.S. Secret Service prevented me from going back the second and third day of the meetings. And then Eric Holder sued me. This is something that the credit rating agencies do not like. They also don't like this for the World Bank credit rating when the World Bank financial statements are out of compliance. You cannot punish lawyers who inform a board of fiddling on the books.
So you just said Eric Holder sued you. What were the grounds for his case against you? What did he sue you for?
They said that it was trespass when I had been reinstated as the acting general counsel.
So he sues you for, or did he have you arrested, or?
Yes, and then they threw me in jail for criminal trespass. That was ultimately knocked out, that prosecution. But it certainly doesn't bode well for the credit rating of the United States.
Now, we often throw around this term economic collapse, dollar collapse, global collapse, economic collapse. And it almost seems like I've been reporting on this pending collapse for years now. And people often might visualize that a collapse is when there's no food on the shelves and there's bread lines everywhere, and the power grid shuts down and there's martial law in the streets. I think people have that perception of what a collapse looks like. Some may even argue that we're in the collapse already, that everything's being artificially propped up and that the dollar's on life support. When we talk about this economic collapse, what really is it? When is it supposed to occur based on all the different economic indicators that we see?
You know, we're actually closer, I think, to a renaissance in the United States than we are to an economic collapse. And what it depends on is we're at a fork in the road. And what it depends on is whether the American people understand that we're in a fork in the road and they themselves opt to take the high road. And I can tell you what the high road looks like. And I can also tell you that if we don't take the right fork in the road, we will be in economic collapse and currency war, and it will be worse than anybody can ever imagine. We will go back into the dark ages. But let me tell you why I think we're so close to a renaissance. There's something called Article 5 of the Constitution. That is when 2/3 of the state legislatures asks for a constitutional convention. Why do we need a constitutional convention? Because we actually have a second secret constitution. In 1871, this was secretly put into place. Many Americans know about it, but more Americans don't know about it. The reason this happened is because when Benjamin Franklin was negotiating the Revolutionary War debt, he got rescheduling, and it was going to fall due in the 1870s. And when that debt fell due and we couldn't pay it, that's when the bankers gave us a second secret constitution. They turned the United States into a corporation. And I can, and I will after this interview, I will give you the study group that was looking at the records in the Carolina Capitol House around that time. This is really what happened, and people don't know about it. So we need to have a constitutional convention. Why don't we have one? The Congress under the Constitution is required to call a constitutional convention when 2/3 of the state legislatures have asked for it. And 41 state legislatures have asked for a constitutional convention. So all that really has to happen is that the American public has to look into this and be convinced by it. And then we will be in a situation where we can have rule of law. But first they have to understand where they really are. They're in a situation where their tax dollars are not going to pay for their education and budget. Their tax dollars are going to pay interest on this Federal Reserve notes, which shouldn't carry interest.
Welcome back to WHDT World News. I'm Gary Franchi, and joining me now is whistleblower from the World Bank, Karen Hudes. We're going to bring you the conclusion of yesterday's interview. Karen, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
Karen, when we concluded yesterday's interview, we were discussing, or you had brought up the new Constitution that was instated in the United States. So is the Constitution that we know today in effect, or is there a different Constitution that you claim?
Unfortunately, we are being snookered by the Congress because every 2 years they reintroduce a state of martial law. And we are not under our first Constitution. We are under this second secret Constitution. What that Constitution provides is that our tax dollars are going to pay interest to the Federal Reserve. They're not paying for any of the services that we need in our country. Instead, where are we getting the money? We're getting it from the poppy fields in Afghanistan and the drug trade. That's how we're financing our country. This is a travesty.
Now, you mentioned that this secret constitution allows for the interest to be paid to the Federal Reserve. But isn't that the Federal Reserve Act that we know that was established in 1913 when it was passed on Christmas Eve? So where does that law fall into place?
You'll remember that President Lincoln was assassinated by a Jesuit. Mm-hmm. That was in order to prevent the greenback dollars that Lincoln had issued directly by the Treasury Department. And so what happened was the bank of that day was then able to continue to earn interest on the currency of the United States. That was why he was assassinated. And the reason why we had that second constitution enacted in 1871 is that is when the Revolutionary War debts fell due. As a matter of fact, one day I opened my mail and somebody mailed me the financing statement for those debts that, together with the unpaid interest on the debts, had accrued to the trillions of dollars.
Now, the concept of a secret constitution, some people might cry foul there. I don't believe a word you're saying because I've never heard of such a thing. How can those claims be substantiated?
Two ways. The first is that I will show you the minutes of the meeting of the patriots who met and looked at the State House records in Carolina when that secret constitution was enacted. And I can show you the financing statements for the Revolutionary War debt. That was the reason we got that second secret constitution.
So is that second secret constitution, who is it in favor of? Is it in favor of the people or the corporate United States?
It's in favor of the banks. It's certainly not in favor of the people. What happens when you have a child is your child is given a Social Security number. They estimate how many taxes your child is going to pay over his or her lifetime. And they take that birth certificate and they issue it on the capital markets and they earn money on it.
Okay, so what you're saying is that the birth certificate itself creates a monetary value on the books with the Federal Reserve?
I'm saying something much worse, actually. What I'm saying is that when every citizen goes into the court system, they are not seen there as themselves a U.S. citizen. They're seen as the person who had their birth certificate pledged. You're there as a debtor. You're not there as a citizen.
So, because of the national debt, are you saying that Americans they're just born into debt and there's nothing that they can really do about it? They're debtors in the system.
We have been converted from human beings that are citizens of the Republic of the United States into chattel. Chattel, that is a legal term for something which is property. We are now considered to be property of the Federal Reserve. We're not considered to be human beings and citizens of the United States.
That's a very strong statement. How do we reverse that? If that is in fact the true statement, how do we reverse that?
The first thing we do is we recognize it. We understand it. And then the second thing we do is we have that constitutional convention, which is our right under our first constitution, and we repeal that banker's constitution. We repeal it, we get rid of it, we do not want it, we do not need it, and we issue our treasury dollars backed by the gold out of the collateral account that has been offered to us.
Some people are very concerned about Article 5 convention, wherein you may have powers, money powers, that could inject themselves into the into that convention process, where the Constitution is rewritten. A lot of people are very concerned that some of the very basic rights that are instilled and enshrined in the Bill of Rights would then be evaporated. Maybe the freedom of the press would be changed to only specific sanctioned outlets can speak freely, or even the Second Amendment would have to be rewritten to only allow certain people to carry firearms to protect others. So there's a lot of people who do have valid concerns with an Article 5 convention. Do you share those concerns?
I say that that is a very good proof to me of just how corrupted our media is. Because if we had a true media that was representing the interests of the citizens, they would know that that is not a concern whatsoever. Because what happens out of that convention is simply recommendations, which have to be voted up or down by 3/4 of the state legislatures.
Do you think the money powers would have enough lobbying capacity to lobby for those 3/4 of the states? I mean, if you think back to when the 16th Amendment was passed, even though it was passed illegally and it wasn't properly ratified by 3/4 of the states, it still became an amendment, and we now are under an income tax system. So if you think about 3/4 of the states ratifying an Article 5 convention, do you believe that the money powers could have influence in that process?
I would simply ask your viewers to take a good look at whether we have a second secret constitution, how we got that constitution, and whether we in the United States have the wherewithal to throw off those shackles. And if we don't, we deserve them.
So where is the second constitution? Where is it? Where do they keep it? What does it say?
The second constitution consists of the fact that we are paying interest on our debt when we could simply have clean treasury dollars backed by gold.
Is it a constitution in the same sense that we understand our constitution as today? Now, when I think of the Constitution, I think of old parchment and handwritten script, and I think of the founding fathers and writing this document out. So when I think of a second constitution, is it fair to say that is this another document that written in the same manner, or is it? Help me visualize what this document says.
What it is it's the Act of 1871, where Maryland and Virginia created this square mile of the District of Columbia, and then they incorporated the United States as a company, and they made the President of the United States the Chief Executive Officer, and they made the representatives of Congress managers. And so when people come to Congress, they're taught very quickly that their constituents are not what it's all about. What it's all about is for them to get on the dole of the federal government, which is there to enslave the people who live in the United States. That's what that is.
So is it fair to call it a constitution then, or is it more or less when Maryland and Virginia created Washington, D.C. as its own district of Columbia as we know it today?
Well, it's more than that, because the federal courts, the judges, are not sitting there in courts of equity. They're secretly treating us as if we are property of the United States. When we come in there, we are not there in a court of equity. So yes, it is a different arrangement with our government.
This secret constitution, is it really more of a corporate document?
What it means is that when you go to court to protect your rights, you don't even get to first base, because that judge is not sitting in what you call a court of equity. They're not looking at you as if you're a citizen of the United States. They're handling you as if you're a person who's just servicing the debt of the United States. You're there as a thing.
So if you're just a thing in a courtroom that's servicing debt, I mean, what does that make every American citizen?
It takes away all of our rights.
So Americans don't have any rights.
Americans need to take back their rights because our founding fathers were very clear about that. We were in a country that had consent of the governed. We were in a country that could bear arms, had the right to bear arms. They understood that we were a liberty-loving people. And actually, the fate of the world is riding on whether we have remained that. And I think we have.
So what do you see as the future of this nation? I know that yesterday we spoke about that you're very optimistic about the global outlook, and there are other individuals who believe that we're on the precipice of a global economic collapse. Given this Constitution that you speak of and the state of the rights of Americans, where do we go from here?
Where we go from here is that we just take a deep breath and thank ourselves for our neighbors and our friends and our country and our founding fathers that gave us the first Constitution, which is protecting not only our rights, but the rights of every human being on this earth. And all that we have to do is say yes to the dollar that John F. Kennedy printed for us and tell the bankers that they're not entitled to keep it from us. It's our birthright. And the gold that belongs to us because Wolfgang Struck has allocated it to us. And when we say yes to that, it's really not that hard to say yes, it seems to me. What we're doing is we're freeing that gold also for the rest of humanity, so all the other countries of the world get their share of the assets. And we just rebuild. And what that would look like is up to us. It's going to be our world to take back and to care for each other.
Some people might disagree with you and say that the Constitution has failed us, that the Constitution, that the Founding Fathers has failed us because we are seeing a Congress pass laws that are contrary to it with no repercussion. We see a commander-in-chief enforcing laws that are contrary to the very document they take an oath to. So has the Constitution, the original Constitution that the founders created, has it failed the American people in that regard?
I think,
or has it, or is it just a failure of humanity or failure of leadership? What do you think?
Let me explain where we are. I think when people understand where we are, they'll see that we only have ourselves to thank for whatever the outcome is going to be, because we are actually at a fork in the road. And I'm working together with whistleblowers, first of all, from the World Bank. That's who I started out working with. And then I started working with anybody as my story and the rest of the whistleblower story got out. And once Elaine Colville, who's in Scotland, she's a World Bank whistleblower, the two of us got our statement up on the UK Parliament website. What was our statement? The first statement I got up was that the capital markets are absolutely, they're just completely controlled by this conglomerate that has 40% of the assets and 60% of the earnings of all the companies that are traded. And the Securities and Exchange Commission is not enforcing insider trading laws, and the Securities and Exchange Commission was not requiring KPMG to do an honest audit of the World Bank financial statements, because I bought a World Bank bond, which meant that I was a bondholder, and the World Bank was not immune. So I went to the Serious Fraud Office in the United Kingdom, and I told the Serious Fraud Office that it was their responsibility, since the UK was also helping to finance the World Bank, and also because UK citizens owned World Bank bonds. It was their responsibility to end this corruption that I was reporting. So the Serious Fraud Office called up the Securities and Exchange Commission. That was in 2010. the SEC couldn't be bothered. The same people at the SEC that brought us Bernie Madoff wouldn't answer the Serious Fraud Office. So then, when the UK Parliament asked a question about supervision of the UK money in the World Bank, I answered that question. I said there was no supervision, that the UK taxpayer money was just going to the dogs at the World Bank. And then there was a second question, which was on privatization. They wanted to know in the UK Parliament whether the functions of the UK public ought to be privatized. And I said, absolutely not, because the entity that was supposed to be supervising the World Bank on behalf of the UK had been privatized, and they were doing a lousy job. And then the third question was, how is the UK Parliament and the rest of the UK government doing on processing complaints? And I said, you're doing a lousy job. I've been complaining to the Parliament for years, and you're just sitting on your hands. And Elaine Colville gave a much more blunt criticism, because she had been going to the Prime Minister and the Ombudsman, and she raked them over the coals. You can see our statements up on the Parliament.
So then, back to the question: Does that mean that you see a failure in the American leadership to uphold the values of the Constitution, or because there are people out there that say, we have this great document and it stands for so much and it's brought us so far, but we have people who are in power who disregard it and simply pay it lip service. So, where do you stand on that position?
Well, I have been going to the U.S. Congress and writing to them and talking to them, and I've been talking, for example, to General Martin Dempsey on December 2nd when he had a town hall meeting. I've been discussing the problem one-on-one when the Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, was a senator. I spoke to him about this power transition model that we were discussing, which is very accurate, which said that we were at a fork in the road, and that if we would lose our allies, we would have a currency war. And they know very well how that model works, because they've been working on it in the Department of Defense, and how very accurate it is. So what can I say? They are completely aware of the fact that we are at the fork in the road. And why I think we're going to take the high road is because they know enough citizens are also aware of this model, and they're demanding of their government that we take the high road. They're not letting them off the hook. They're writing their Congress people. And for example, there was a meeting. I've been at this business of whistleblowing, and I've been getting public coverage now for quite some time, although not with the mainstream media. You won't find the first interview on the mainstream media. So going back to one of your questions about RTTV, when RTTV did have me on, this is not a little story. Where did you find this in the mainstream media? So no, we're not. I guess the answer is, you get the government you deserve. There's something called the National Taxpayer Union. They have a blog up on me. I've had a number of people writing their Congress people, and I was going to start talking about the county executives, because there was a meeting of county executives in July. And what happened was one of the people that just writes to me based on some of the news coverage that I'm getting with HDTV and also with the stories on the alternative media. So they contacted me and they said, Karen, you can't just keep going to the governors. You have got to go to something else, because the governors are not responding. So that's when I started writing to an organization of county executives. And they had a meeting in July, and they elected Ike Leggett, who is the county executive of Montgomery County, Maryland, which is the county that I live in. And so I have been keeping Ike Leggett informed. I've been asking all of the people that contact me to contact their county executives as well. So what I would say is that we have a very intricate but powerful system in our republic that does have all of the bells and whistles necessary. And we will be able to take back our republic. I'm very optimistic that the machinery will work. But I'm also not underestimating the amount of the cleanup job, because I've been, as a lawyer, I've been going to the American Bar Association. I would have to say that the legal profession is seriously, seriously broken, that the bar associations should not be responsible for licensing attorneys because they have not been responsive. I say that that system is totally broken.
Karen, we're just about out of time, and I want to give you another opportunity to give your final thoughts to the American people on the state of America and the state of the world, and the practical things that the individuals can do to make change happen for humanity.
Well, the very first thing I would say is go out and buy silver and gold coins, because we still have Federal Reserve notes, and those pieces of paper are toilet paper. That is the very first thing that you should do, because you do not want your family not to have currency, and what you currently have is not worth anything. That's why the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are no longer paying for their international trade in dollars. Governments are no longer holding the Federal Reserve notes. We need to be you need to do your homework as citizens and find out what it means when you have Federal Reserve notes. They're valueless and they are unconstitutional, and we need to get that outfit out of here. That's the very first thing. And then the second thing is that we have to all work together to clean up the mess. And I don't think it's going to be that hard, actually, to get our republic back.